Anti-government protesters back on the streets of Bangkok. Guangdong live poultry markets to be disinfected tomorrow. And local welfare spending set to go up following a recent court ruling.
Good evening. Anti-government protesters have once again flooded the streets of the Thai capital, Bangkok. Candidate registration begins tomorrow for snap elections that have been called for February 2nd. But more uncertainty looms after the major opposition Democrat Party announced it will boycott the election. After nearly 2 months of political turmoil, mass rallies across Bangkok have become almost routine. Tens of thousands of protesters are once again pushing to oust the government of caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. The latest mass rallies come a day after the main opposition Democrat Party announced it will boycott the general election. The party's leader, former Prime Minister Apisit Waichachua, told supporters that participating in the election would legitimize a democratic system that's been distorted by those in power. The democratic process has been slanted by some groups, and that makes people lose faith in a party system and an election, he said. The move was welcomed by protesters who are demanding that Yingluck step down ahead of elections and that an appointed interim government put reforms in place before any election is held. I believe it's good that they boycotted so we can reform the system and create a new one, says this protester. As protesters scuffled with police outside the Prime Minister's residence, pro-government red shirts are vowing support for the elections.
We have been ready since the Prime Minister dissolved the House, and we will stand by the nation, our religion, and our king, and fight for those principles, even with our bare hands.
On Saturday, Yingluck told supporters that she accepts that reforms are needed, but only after the election. She remains determined to stay in charge as caretaker Prime Minister until then. Thailand's Election Commission reaffirmed the election will not be delayed and that candidate registration will start Monday as planned. A spokesperson says Yingluck has already submitted her application to seek her party's nomination.
To France now, where a Chinese hotel magnate and a wine entrepreneur are feared dead along with 2 others. Police say their helicopter crashed while the Chinese billionaire was touring a massive wine chateau that he had just purchased in Bordeaux. Lam Kok, owner of the Hong Kong-based hotel group Brilliant, bought 65 hectares of the wine chateau on Friday. Former owner James Gregoire. To celebrate the sale, Gregoire, who is also a helicopter pilot, took Kok, his 12-year-old son, and a Chinese interpreter on a helicopter tour of the property. For reasons unknown, their helicopter crashed in the river Dordogne. French emergency services located the remains of the destroyed helicopter, and in it was the body of a child believed to be Kok's 12-year-old son. A search is still underway for Kok, Gregoire, and the interpreter. Yesterday marked the 25th anniversary of the infamous bombing of a Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, Scotland. Several memorials were held to remember the 270 people killed in what has gone down in history as one of the deadliest terror attacks Britain was subjected to. The families of some of those who died in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Scotland 25 years ago gathered at memorial services in Britain and the United States. Bagpipes played and the names of those killed were read aloud at London's Westminster Abbey. Hundreds also gathered to pay their respects in the Scottish town of Lockerbie. This woman's son was one of many college students who never made it home for Christmas.
I wanted to come here not only to honor Thomas, but the other 269 victims, and I wanted to stand in the place where my son took his last breath.
A solemn ceremony also took place at Virginia's Arlington National Cemetery, where the U.S. Attorney General admitted the case is not yet solved.
It persists in our unfinished but ongoing work to see that justice is done and to ensure that those who commit acts of terror are held accountable.
Only one man, former Libyan intelligence official Abdel Basit el-Megrahi, was convicted of the bombing and given a life sentence. But he was released in 2009 after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. He died in Tripoli last year. A quarter of a century after the bombing, and many still believe the Libyan government orchestrated the attack.
I'm convinced that the Libyan government was responsible for this. Other people within the Libyan regime were players in the actual attack, and Mr. Megrahi played a small role, purchasing clothing, being there the day that the bomb left and getting it on the airplane.
That would explain why in 2003, former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi accepted Libya's responsibility for the bombing and paid compensation to the victims' families. Either way, the governments of Britain, the U.S., and Libya issued a joint statement on this 25th anniversary, vowing to ensure the full facts of the case are one day revealed.
The conflict in South Sudan continues to spiral out of control after 3 U.S. military aircraft came under fire. The U.S. military says 4 of its members were injured in the attacks, and all 3 Osprey CV-22 aircraft involved in the mission were damaged. The flight crews had to abort a mission to evacuate American citizens after rebels fired on them in a remote region of the country. Fighting between South Sudan's military and renegade troops has claimed hundreds of lives, just 2 years after it won independence from Sudan. World leaders are worried that the ethnic violence could drag the country into a full-blown civil war. Today, a memorial was held at a United Nations mission for 2 Indian peacekeepers who were killed while protecting civilians.
Former oil tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky was reunited with family in Berlin just 1 day after Russian President Vladimir Putin pardoned him. This after Khodorkovsky served a decade in jail for alleged fraud and tax evasion. After being released from a remote prison in Russia, the 50-year-old critic of Putin immediately flew to Berlin. That's where an emotional family reunion took place as Khodorkovsky's elderly parents, Marina and Boris, began hugging him and crying. German parliament member for the Greens, Mary-Louise Beck, also got a chance to meet him. She confirmed German diplomacy had helped to bring about Khodorkovsky's release. Khodorkovsky had been in jail since his arrest in October 2003 on fraud and tax evasion charges. He had pleaded not guilty to those charges.
The body of a British surgeon who died after 13 months in a Syrian prison was taken to the Lebanese capital on Saturday. An international Red Cross vehicle brought Abbas Khan's coffin to a hospital in Beirut. The 32-year-old orthopedic surgeon was seized by Syrian troops in the northern city of Aleppo late last year, shortly after he entered the country from Turkey. Khan's family said he was on a humanitarian mission to Syria, which is torn by civil war. His mother went to Damascus to visit him in prison last Monday, but was told he had committed suicide by hanging himself. She accused Syrian intelligence services of killing her son. A British member of parliament had been negotiating with Syrian authorities to secure Khan's release. According to lawmakers, Khan was expected to be freed soon. As part of efforts to fight bird flu, all live poultry markets in Guangdong province will be disinfected tomorrow. Evelina Leung has more.
Since July, there have been 6 human cases of H7N9 bird flu in Guangdong. 4 of the patients are still being treated in hospital. Mainland authorities point out that it's sometimes difficult to detect the virus, and some of the cases could not be confirmed until after several rounds of tests were conducted.
入咗醫院以後，醫院就有懷疑啦。
Zhang Nanshan, a respiratory disease expert, said that shows there's room for improvement in the rapid testing procedure. He's heading a team to look into ways to prevent a further outbreak of the disease. Meanwhile, Zhang Yonghui of Guangzhou Center for Disease Control and Prevention said there's no evidence of human-to-human transmission of the virus so far. But Zhang warned of more scattered H7N9 cases in the near future because the virus is most active during winter and spring. Now, to prevent the situation from worsening, all live poultry markets across Guangdong will be closed for disinfection tomorrow. Similar measures will be taken before the start of the New Year and Lunar New Year holidays. Besides H7N9, there's H5N2. There's been an H5N2 bird flu outbreak in poultry in Hebei province. About 4,000 chickens were killed. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
Financial Secretary John Tsang said in his blog today that government expenditure on welfare will increase next year due to a recent court ruling. The Court of Final Appeal ruled that the 7-year residence requirement for applicants of the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance is unconstitutional. The Society for Community Organization, which supported the applicant in the court case, says it is planning to continue to challenge a similar residence requirement for public housing. Evelina Lung again.
Financial Secretary Zhang Zhang revealed on his blog today the government's finances will be taking a hit next year due to several recent incidents. One is the Court of Final Appeal ruling, which states that the 7-year residence requirement for applicants of the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance is unconstitutional. Another is the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to start tapering off its monetary stimulus. Despite the backlash, the Society for Community Organization has found itself receiving in recent days for supporting the applicant in the landmark welfare case. The group insists it will keep on fighting for what it believes it's fair.
That the government from early 2004 changed the application criteria for CSSA recipients so that it tightened the residency requirement. It's a public policy matter. The government failed to give a reasonable rationale that not only affect Ms. Khan, but various other new arrivals.
The organization is now planning to challenge the residence requirement for public housing applications. If successful, this could mean a further increase in demand for the already limited housing supply in Hong Kong. Richard Choi said the group understands there is a shortage of land in Hong Kong, but he says this is a problem the government has to tackle. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
And still ahead in our newscast, a dispute involving mainland tourists still not fully resolved. Customs officers crack down on businesses using pirated software, and illegal container homes on farmland in Yuen Long.